So don't forget to, I haven't done these in a while. You have to remind me when I'm forgetting. Don't forget to put your name in the chat for attendance. And yeah, we'll go from there. All right, so we're going to talk about the format of the test for those of you that are testing, and then we're also going to talk about some test tips, and then we're going to do some practice. So I don't know how far we'll get today, but we'll do as much as we can. All right. Does anybody have any specific topics that they want me to specifically go over? I obviously won't be able to prepare for them today, but if you tell me today, I can prepare to either present specifics tomorrow or Friday. So if you have anything, yell at me now or think about it throughout today and shoot it into the chat, and then I will compile a list and add anything that you guys want specific. All right, so very first, if you're going to take either the FPC or the CPP, make sure you download the handbook. They do assume that you have read that handbook before you actually go take the exam. So Dolby ladies, you have to register online. And if you download the handbook, it does give you instructions on how to register. If you're taking the FPC, I'm just going to flip slides here really quick. If you're taking the FPC, you don't have to have any eligibility. Everybody can take that one. But if you're taking the CPP, there is some eligibility. So you want to make sure that you're eligible before you actually apply for the exam. And you do have to prove your eligibility on your application before you're approved to take the exam. So if you're planning on taking that CPP, there are some eligibility, which I do show here. So like I said, the FPC examination is open to anybody who wants to take it. The CPP, on the other hand, there's this big list of stuff that you have to qualify for one of them, not all of them, just one of them. So the big one is you've been practicing in the payroll profession for a total of 3 out of the 5 years preceding the date of the examination application. So if you've been in payroll for 3 of the last 5 years, then you should meet the requirement to take the CPP exam. The other ones, there's other criteria that you can take, but this number 1 is the most common that you're eligible for. So again, I pulled these screenshots directly out of the handbook. So if you download that handbook, and again, I did put the links here in the PowerPoint. So if you download those handbooks, you will see all of the information that I copy and pasted here. You do have to submit an application and be approved before you can actually schedule your exam. And then you do obviously have to pay for your exam. And they're not incredibly cheap. I don't know how much they are this year. I know when I took it, it was, gosh, $500 or so. And that was back in 2019. So, okay. All right. On the FPC exam, 29% is going to be core payroll concepts, 17% is compliance, research, and resources, 24% is actually calculating paychecks, 7% is payroll processing and support systems and administration, 7% is payroll administration and management, 8% is audits, and 8% is accounting. On the CPP exam, there's 24% on core payroll concepts, 16% on compliance research and resources, 20% on calculation of the paycheck, 12% on payroll process and support systems and administration, 10% on payroll administration and management, 9% on audits, and 9% on accounting. So you can see those percentages change just slightly depending on whether you're taking the FPC or the CPP exam. And again, these are screenshots directly out of those handbooks. So download those handbooks and it'll all be at your fingertips. The FPC exam is 3 hours. You have 3 hours to complete it. It's 150 questions and they're all multiple choice. 25 questions are pre-test questions and they are not counted in the scoring of the examination. So only 125 of the questions are actually scoreable. CPP, on the other hand, is a little bit longer. You have 4 hours to complete the exam, and it's 190 multiple choice questions. Again, there are 25 pre-test questions that are not counted in your scoring. So it is 4 hours. I will tell you that I took pretty much all 4 hours to take it. When I took the exam, funny story, I finished it and I was just sitting there staring at my screen because it tells you right then and there whether you pass or fail. And I was sitting there staring at it and it told me I passed, and I didn't really believe it. And the old man that was at the testing facility, he was like not looking at me like, "Are you okay? Come on, you passed." Anyways, it was quite comical. During the exam, you will have access to some resources. Those resources are basically all of those publications and tables that you have been using to calculate paychecks and tax withholding and all of that stuff. So you will have access to this. Again, I pulled this directly out of the handbook, so that information is in there as to what you will have access to. This one makes me laugh. It says candidates are encouraged but not required to use a calculator. Anyone that wants to take that exam without a calculator, you are a brave soul, and I hands down to you. My goodness, that would be quite a feat. So I would recommend taking a calculator. You do have to be a little careful. Make sure that your calculators are basically very basic. They can't have any super fancy functions. As many of you know, I used to be a math teacher, and therefore I have a very fancy calculator. I could not use that one. I had to go back to Walmart and buy a basic calculator to take with me. At the exam site, they did have calculators on site, so if you didn't take one with you, you could have used theirs. I chose to buy one so I could practice with it before I went and took the exam, because I didn't want to walk in there and have a very unfamiliar calculator. That was just my choice. I do have to preface all of this with, I took my exam before the pandemic. So I took my exam live and in person. I know a lot of the testing options now are remote via internet, and you have to have a camera, and the room that you're in has to be approved, and all of those things. I can't speak a lot to that because that's not how I took my test, but there is a ton of information in the handbooks about how your testing environment has to be if you do take it virtually. I'm not sure how much live testing is available now with the pandemic and all the changes that are happening with that right now. So do your research, make sure you know how you're going to test, where you're going to test, all that good stuff. If you do leave the testing room to go to the bathroom, it takes away from your 4 hours. Just a note. Don't dehydrate yourself, but also don't drink a gallon before you go in there. All right. Helpful hints for reducing test anxieties. The first one is know the testing center. Like I just said, if you're going to a live testing center, know where it is. Be there a little bit early. Make sure you know where you're going. If you're doing it virtually, make sure you're prepared, your room is prepared, all of those things. Make sure you get some sleep the night before. A lot of people I know like to stay up late and cram before their tests, and that actually generally doesn't help. Like I say, I used to be a high school math teacher, and cramming was not ever a very good idea. So as much as you want to cram, make sure you get some rest and that you're good and rested on the day of the test. The last one is what I already said, practice with your calculator. That's why I went to Walmart and bought a very basic calculator so that I could practice with that calculator instead of being unfamiliar with it on exam day. So I also changed the batteries in the parking lot because I didn't want them to die, and I'm very paranoid about things like that. So anyways, those are my test tips. Make sure that you're comfortable with the electronic format. We've all taken electronic tests in this day and age. When I took the exam, I was allowed to have a piece of paper basically that was laminated, and I could use a expo marker to write on it. I couldn't erase anything, but they give you plenty of pages to just continue to write things. And so that's how I had my scratch work. With the virtual testing, I'm honestly not sure how they do that, but I'm sure that they give you some sort of scratch paper that you can do your work on. Make sure that you read the examination tutorial and instructions prior to the start of the exam. This one I can't emphasize enough. Read each examination question carefully. I'll tell you right now, they give you more information than you need, or they give you information to try and confuse you. And so you, at the bottom, the bottom line is you need to answer the question that they asked. So make sure you read the question very carefully and know what you're trying to answer. And don't read into it and try and give answers that you think they want, because they do try and trick you with additional information. Make sure that you answer all of the questions. So leaving it blank is absolutely going to be a wrong answer. So, pick one if you don't have any idea. Usually you can at least get it narrowed down to, one of two, and then you have a better shot. So make sure you answer all of the questions. When I took the exam, I went through and answered all the questions, and I flagged the ones that I was not positive on. And then once I had completed all 190 questions, I went back through each question, focusing on those that I had flagged to recheck my work and make sure that I was comfortable with the answers. You'll also want to make sure you manage your time. You do only have 4 hours to complete the exam. So that's why when I went through the exam for the first time, I answered every question, even if I wasn't 100% sure of the answer, so that I could make sure that at least I had an answer on there. And then once I had completed all 190 questions, I went back to the beginning and started over and focused on those that I had flagged, because I wasn't real sure about those ones. So if you have time, recheck your calculations. My first and foremost recommendation is to always check your gross up calculations, because you can work through those backwards. So those are questions that it does take time to check your answer, but since you can work through them backwards, those are always good ones to make sure that your answers are correct, because you should have everything at your fingertips to make sure that you have the right answer. And of course, the last one is just what I said again, verify all your answers to the gross up questions. So again, I reiterate the, oops, I highlighted the wrong one. That should be the one below it. Read each question carefully and answer the question. And then make sure you do your gross up checks. So we're just going to go through some quick test tips. I'm not really going to go through these examples in super great detail, but I'm going to talk more about what test tips I have for you on each of these. They're going to ask you to calculate overtime or overtime premium, and you want to make sure that you understand that your overtime premium rate is half of the calculated hourly rate. So in order to get your calculated hourly rate, sometimes you have to add in there. So for this example, this person was paid a bonus that was allocated equally over the past 6 months. So you're going to find out how much of that bonus went to each hour and find your hourly rate, and then multiply by 0.5 to find your overtime premium rate, and then multiply by the number of hours of overtime to figure out how much you owe them for the overtime premium. So my biggest test tip on this one is don't think too much into it. Sometimes we try and do fancy math. When I am doing these calculations, I literally just calculate the straight time. I calculate anything above the straight time, like any bonuses or anything that should be included in that, calculate my hourly wage, then I calculate my overtime premium rate, and then calculate how much the overtime premium pay is based off of that rate times the number of hours over 40 in the work week. And then depending on what they ask you, again, sometimes they only ask you for your overtime, sometimes they ask you for the whole gross amount. You want to read the question carefully and make sure that you understand what the answer, what they're actually asking you for, so you give the appropriate answer. Calculating non-exempt salary overtime premium pay. So this doesn't happen super often in my experience in the payroll world, where you have non-exempt salaried individuals. So it's something I just don't feel like we practice a whole lot, but keep in mind that you can have an employee that's paid a salary, but they are non-exempt, meaning if they work over their normal hours, they have to be compensated for that. I absolutely had those questions on my CPP exam, and I know that other people Rebecca, who's not on today, but she definitely had a question like this on her CPP exam. So just keep that in mind. This first example, Sarah is paid semi-monthly salary of $2,000 and works 35 hours per week. So it's really important to keep in mind that she only is scheduled to work 35 hours per week, which means as a salaried employee, if she works over 35 hours per week, she needs to be compensated for that time. Not at an overtime rate unless it's over 40 hours in the week, but she has to be compensated for anything over her normal scheduled hours. So keep that in mind. In this example, really quickly, she's paid semi-monthly, which means she's paid 24 times per year. Multiplied by $2,000 means her annual salary is $48,000. She only works 1,820 hours in the year because she's only scheduled 35 hours a week. That's different than the normal 2,080 hours. So to find her regular rate of pay, you need to make sure that you're only dividing by 1,820 instead of the typical 2,080 that we often think of as paraprofessionals, because it's just very typical for us. So again, read the question very carefully and make sure that you're picking out those important details. I know with an online exam, it's a little bit harder. When I was a student, I used to highlight or underline important words to me. Even when I'm taking a test on the computer, sometimes I write down those important things since I can't really underline them, but I write them on my scratch paper so that I make sure that I remember them when I'm doing my calculations. So if we calculate her regular rate of pay, we're taking that annual salary of $48,000, we're going to divide it by her normal hours worked, which is 1,820, and we get 26.37. Again, remember to round as you go. So we're rounding to 2 decimal places because this is money. 0 to 4, you're going to leave it the same. 5 and above, you're going to round up. So this one happened to be 3 in that 3rd decimal place. So since it's 0 to 4, we're going to leave that 7 a 7, and we're not going to round up to an 8. Same example, a little bit different scenario. The employee works 42 hours in 1 work week. So she has to be compensated for those hours over 35 because her normal hours are only 35 for her salary that she's being paid. So we're going to calculate her regular rate of pay the exact same way that we just did. So her regular rate of pay is $26.37. She worked 7 hours over her normal scheduled hours. So we have to compensate her for those 7 hours. Now, 2 of those hours happen to be over 40 in the work week. So she not only gets compensated for the regular time for those hours, she's also going to get overtime premium for 2 of those 7 hours. And again, going back to the previous slide, when you're calculating your overtime premium, take your regular rate of pay, multiply by 0.5. That's your overtime premium rate. Multiply that by your number of hours of overtime, which in this case is 2, you get 26.38. So you're going to add up all those things: her salary of $2,000, her hours in excess of her normally scheduled hours, which was 184.59, plus her overtime premium of 26.38. Questions on that one? Just keep in mind that salary non-exempt have some special rules. Salary exempt are the ones that they don't have to play by the rules. They don't get paid overtime. They don't get paid things like that. But if they're salaried and they're non-exempt, you have to calculate some extra pay if they work extra. So careful on that one. Piecework, overtime premium pay. So this one, again, we just have to remember that we have to calculate our regular rate of pay, and then we can calculate our overtime. So make sure that you're rounding as you go on your calculations. In this example, Brad receives $175 for each doll he assembles, plus he gets a 25-cent bonus per doll for each doll over 352 that he assembles in a regular 46-hour work week. In 1 work week, he assembles 420 dolls. So for the 420 dolls, he gets $175 per doll. That gives us $735. 68 of those dolls were above and beyond the 352 limit. So he gets an extra 25 cents for those dolls, which is an extra $17. So adding those two together to get his total amount of piecework earnings that he earned for the week, we get 752. He worked 46 hours. So we're going to divide by 46 and get 1635. Again, round as you go. This one, we look at that third decimal place. It happens to be a 7. So we're going to take that 4 and we're going to round it up to a 5. So we get 1635 for his regular rate of pay. To come up with his overtime premium rate, we're going to multiply by 0.5 and we get 818 as his overtime premium rate. He worked 6 hours over 40, which means he's going to get an overtime premium pay amount of 49.08. And his total earnings for the work week is the 752 plus that overtime premium pay of 49.08, and we get 801.08. So my biggest hint to you guys is take it in pieces. I know it's intimidating to take a 190 question test, but you do have 4 hours. So there's going to be questions that you're going to be really fast on. And there's going to be other questions that you need some extra time on to do some calculations. My recommendation is take some time to do those calculations. Don't sit around and if you don't know how to do it, that's a whole different thing. But on those ones that you need some time to work through the calculations, take that time because then you're going to get the right answer. So take it in pieces, figure out your regular earnings. From there, figure out your overtime rate if you need to, add the two together to get your total pay. So again, just some test tips. This one, if you have fringe type of benefits that are taxable to the employee, you want to know this formula. So the includable fringe benefit amount is equal to the fair market value minus the sum of the employee paid amount after taxes and the amount excluded by law. So that is a formula that we have seen multiple times on the CPP exam. So make sure that you're aware of it. The other thing is know those acronyms. So know that IFVA is the includable fringe benefit amount. Know that FMV, that's a really popular one, is fair market value, all those good things. So quick example. Harry's employer pays for Harry's parking space in a commercial parking lot next to the employer's premises. The employer's cost for the space is $320 per month, which is the same fee charged to all monthly payers. Harry pays nothing for the parking space and has access to it every day. Up to $270 per month of employer provided parking is excluded from income in 2020. So Harry's taxable income from the parking benefit is determined to be $320, the cost of the actual parking space for the employer, minus the amount that Harry pays, plus the amount excludable. Harry doesn't pay anything, so it's actually just going to be $320 minus the excludable amount of $270, which means that Harry's only going to get taxed on $50 per month, not the whole $320. For some reason, taxable or transportation fringe benefits seem to be a popular question on the exam. So I would make sure that you're aware of the limits on those, basically. Just, yeah, make sure you freshen up on those requirements and the when it's taxable to the employee and when it's not. So for example, Sherman Shoe Corp offers its employees a choice between $80 transit pass and $80 per month in additional compensation. Only the employees who choose the cash instead of the transit pass must have the $80 included in their income each month, because that $80 is under the excludable amount. And so if you're taking it as a transportation benefit, then you don't have to pay taxes on it. If it was over $270, you would have to. But if you're not going to take that benefit and you're just going to take it in cash, then you absolutely have to be taxed on it. The cents per mile seems to be a popular thing to ask about for personal use of a company provided vehicle. For 2021, the standard mileage rate is 56 cents per mile. Employers must expect the employees to regularly use the vehicle while conducting the employer's business. or the vehicle must actually be driven at least 10,000 miles annually, including personal use, be used primarily by the employees. The fair market value of the vehicle placed in service in 2021 cannot exceed $51,100. So if you have a really, really expensive car, you can't use the cents per mile. You have to use a different method to compute. So I will tell you that one of my questions asked you to use the cents per mile method, but they told you that the fair market value of the vehicle was over that threshold. So the answer was that you can't use that method. So anyways, that's one of those trick things that they like to do to you. So make sure you know that limit. Make sure that you're thinking about those tricky things that they could do to you. So for example, Margaret drives a qualifying car 16,000 miles during 2021. 7,600 of those miles were personal. And if the employer pays for the gasoline for her car, then the fair market value of her personal use of the car is calculated by doing the 7,600 miles that she drove personally times the 56 cents a mile. And so that taxable amount to her is $4,256. If Margaret, though, pays for her own gasoline, then the fair market value is going to go down a little bit because per the IRS, you can reduce the rate from 0.56 cents to 0.505. So you can reduce it by 0.055 per month if the employee pays for their own gas.
I'm going to show you a thing when I come back.
GTL seems to also be a popular topic. And I think the reason it's a popular topic is because it can get confusing because there's a certain amount of GTL that's actually not taxable, and that amount is $50,000. So know it. There is a table, this table right here, they give you. This is one of the resources that they provide to you if you do take the exam. So you don't have to memorize this table, but you do need to know how to use it. So for example, Valerie is 64 years old as of December 31st. Her employer's non-discriminatory group term life insurance plan provides her with coverage equal to 2 times her annual salary as of January 1st. Her salary as of January 1st was $65,000. Her employer's plan has a maximum coverage amount of $125,000. So let's calculate her GTL. Valerie does contribute $25 per month in after-tax dollars toward the insurance premiums. So first thing we're going to do is figure out how much coverage she's going to have. So it says that she gets 2 times her annual salary. So 2 times 65,000 is 130,000. Unfortunately, though, her employer's maximum coverage is 125. So we're going to use 125 instead of 130. $50,000 of that is non-taxable. So we're going to take that 125,000 and subtract out that 50,000. That leaves us with 75,000. Using the table, because the table is built as cost per thousand, we now need to divide by 1,000 so that we can use the table. 75,000 divided by 1,000 is 75. Valerie is 64 years old on December 31st. So if we look at that table, we get 0.66 for the rate that we're going to use, and we're going to multiply that by 75, which we get $49.50. $49.50 minus the $25 because Valerie does contribute to the premium. So she isn't taxed on the whole thing because she pays for part of it with her after-tax dollars. So she's only taxed on the difference between the $49.50, which is what we got from multiplying the rate in the table, 0.66 times that 75 that we calculated out, and take away that $25 she pays. So she's only taxed on the $24.50 per month. Okay. Questions on that one? Perfect. The most important thing to remember on GTL is that $50,000 of it is non-taxable. I am fairly certain that I was asked a question about how much the employee should be taxed on their GTL coverage of $25,000. And the simple answer is 0 because it's not over 50,000. So one of those things, don't think too much into it because it can get you in trouble. Remember those little rules, and sometimes they are asking the simple question. So keep that in mind. Don't think too much. Employer loans. I did have a question on this on calculating an employer loan, so make sure that you're aware of the rules. When the outstanding principal of the below market loans made to an employee does not exceed $10,000 on any day during the year, no portion of the discounted interest is subject to FICA, FUTA, or federal income tax. If on the other hand, if they do exceed 10,000, then the total loan balance, the difference between the interest charged by the employer and the IRS rate of interest is subject to FICA and FUTA and is reported as federal wages. You do not have to withhold federal taxes on it, but it does get reported in box 1. So eventually the employee would have to pay tax on it for federal withholding as well. There are no special provisions when a loan is made in relation to an employer's relocation of an employee. So just keep that in mind. Any loan forgiven by an employer is considered compensation to the employee and is subject to all withholding taxes. So if for some reason something is forgiven, it's now become taxable compensation. When an employer loans money to an employee at the applicable federal interest rate to purchase employer stock, then reduces the principal of the loan when the stock's value declines, the amount of the reduction in principal is income and is then subject to taxes. So those are just rules that you should be aware of when it comes to employer loans. The big one that I remember questions on is calculating the difference between the taxable income versus for the loan at it's the second bullet here. If the loan balance exceeds 10,000 on any day, the difference between the interest charged by the employer and the IRS rate of interest is subject to taxes. So make sure you can calculate those differences. Stock options, make sure that you're aware of these terms so that you can use them effectively on the test. I'll be honest, I don't think I had any stock option questions on the test, but I know Rebecca did, and she took hers more recently than I did. So she is probably has a better idea of what may be on it. She took hers last year in 2020, and I took mine the year before. So this one is just a quick example, and it's to point out that they give you extra details that you don't always need. So an employee earns $4,500 per month and defers 3% to a 401k plan. The employee is paid semi-monthly. Calculate any federal taxes that must be withheld from the employee's monthly 401k deferral. So make sure that you're reading it and that you don't read into any of the additional information that they give you. So in this case, the question is asking what federal taxes have to be withheld from the 401k deferral. Keep in mind, they told you that the employee earns $4,500 per month, and then they told you the employee is paid semi-monthly. So the fact that they told you the employee is paid semi-monthly is erroneous information. They told you what the employee makes per month, and then they asked you what the tax amount on the 401k deferral is per month. So the fact that they told you that the employee is paid semi-monthly, it's just erroneous information trying to make you multiply that amount by 2, then doing the 3%, and then doing the taxable wages. So again, they do that. I promise they do it. So keep in mind that. So 1033 should be the right answer, which should be 4,500 times 0.0765. I'm sorry, 4,500 times 0.03 times 0.0765. Questions on that one? They do it, they give you extra information that you don't need. So be careful. On Deferred compensation, the biggest thing that I remember being asked about was the limits. Luckily, the limits, hopefully, we're pretty familiar with as payroll professionals, at least in, gosh, it's already September. How did that happen? So 401k, most of the common deferred compensation plans, the limit is 19,500. The catch-up limit is 6,500, and you can only do the catch-up if you are over 50 years old, or you're going to be over 50 in the calendar year. The difference between Roth, a 401k Roth versus a 401k traditional, is that the Roth is taken after taxes. So a traditional, you deduct your 401k amount before you calculate your federal income tax withholding. A Roth is going to be after that calculation. So make sure you keep that one in mind as well. Cafeteria plans, another fancy name for cafeteria plans is a Section 125 plan, because it's Section 125 of the IRS code. So benefits that can be included in cafeteria plans, keep in mind these types of things: accident and health plans, dependent care, group term life, short-term and long-term disability, HSAs, contributions to a qualified cash or deferred arrangement, 401k plans, elective vacation days, cash, FSAs, or adoption assistance. Benefits that are not included in 120 in cafeteria plans, or what Section 125 plans, are educational assistance plans, scholarships and fellowship grants, rides and commuter vans, de minimis fringes, no additional cost services, employee discounts. That one I remember getting a question on, and I'm not real sure why, but keep in mind employee discounts cannot be included in a Section 125 plan. Working condition fringes, qualified compensation, or deferred compensation arrangements, except under a qualified 401k plan, and qualified transportation fringe benefits. Tax deposits. This was always a big one. And hopefully we all as payroll people are aware of the thresholds and the look back periods for determining the frequency of when taxes are going to be due. Keep in mind the CPP exam and the FPC exam are only going to question you on federal regulations. So they're not going to be state specific, but states do have specific regulations and look back periods and reasons that you have to be a certain type of depositor. So of course, Colorado is the big one for us. Colorado's laws very much follow federal laws, so that makes it nice for us in Colorado, but I know there's a lot of other states that don't follow federal. They have their own special rules. One that I learned about recently is Minnesota. They do weird things over there in Minnesota. So the look back period is the period from July 1st through June 30th of the preceding calendar year. So in 2021, January 1, 2021, we're going to look all the way back to mid-year 2019. So third quarter 2019 through second quarter of 2020 as our look back period to tell us how often we need to pay the IRS starting in 2021. So keep that in mind. If your withholding is over 50,000 during the look back period, then you're required to be a semi-weekly payer to the IRS. The other thing that can happen is if you ever incur over $100,000 federal tax liability, you are automatically made a semi-weekly filer and payer for the rest for the foreseeable future. So I don't think it would happen very often, but if you were an employer who had very small tax payments and you never were over that threshold, if for some reason you paid out a massive bonus or something like that and your liability went over 100,000 for one single payroll, you are automatically a semi-weekly filer. So keep that in mind. Due dates for taxes. This goes right along with that previous slide. If you're a semi-weekly filer, you have to know when your taxes are due. So if your pay is on Saturday, Sunday, Monday, or Tuesday, your tax payment, if you're a semi-weekly payer, is due on Friday. If your check date is Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday, then your semi-weekly taxes are due the following Wednesday. Keep in mind that date does change a little bit with federal holidays. That's on the top of my mind this week because it's Wednesday when it should only be Tuesday because we all took Monday off, which threw us all off for the week. Not that I'm complaining, it was nice to have a day off. But instead of our taxes being due on Wednesday this week, like normal, they were due on Thursday because of the Monday holiday. So that does get adjusted a little bit based off of federal holidays. If you have over $100,000 tax liability at any given time for federal taxes, you have to deposit the next business day. So this is not over $100,000 per payroll. It's if you ever get to $100,000 tax liability. So for example, if you had a pay date today and then you ran a bonus for tomorrow, if the combined amount puts you over $100,000, your tax payment is due Friday. If that makes sense, because you put you over that $100,000 limit. So the minute you hit that $100,000 limit, you must deposit next business day. So keep that in mind. That's an important one. And I remember getting questions about that on my CPP exam. So monthly depositors, it's due by the 15th of the month following the month of withholding. If there's a holiday, they generally push that back to the next day. So if it's a weekend. So if the 15th falls on a Saturday or Sunday, it's usually due the 17th Monday or the 16th Monday, depending on that day. So keep that in mind. Again, that $100,000 tax liability, if you ever get to that point, you automatically get pushed to a semi-weekly depositor. So keep that in mind. There are special rules if you withhold a very, 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 very small amount, less than $1,000, then you can deposit annually. But that's pretty uncommon. You don't see that very often. So in the spring, I had a friend take the test, and this friend she's familiar with payroll and all that good stuff, but she wasn't familiar with the actual name of what system is used to make federal tax deposits. So this is a good one to know. EFTPS is how we make federal tax deposits. There are different ways that you can make the tax deposits, but they are all through some sort of the EFTPS system. So like we as a payroll service bureau, we have EFTPS batch providers. So we make all of our payments through a software that's provided by the IRS that allows us to upload those payments and send them all at once. You can also go online to EFTPS and make those payments directly. So EFTPS is a good one to remember, and it's how you make your tax payments for your payroll taxes. So Form 940, Form 941, 943, 944, 945. Speaking of tax forms, there's a lot of them, and they are not always easy to remember. 941 is obviously probably the most common one that we are familiar with. That's the quarterly tax return for employment taxes. 940 is also probably a pretty familiar one to most of us. That's the annual return for federal unemployment tax, or FUTA. So those are going to be the big ones. Other documents that we're pretty familiar with are W-2s. Those are presented to the employees at the end of the year. W-2C is just like it sounds, W-2 corrected. So that's a good one to remember. A W-3 is the transmittal of wage and tax statements. So it's basically the summarizing document that summarizes all the W-2s that were submitted for a company for the entire year. If you submit a W-2C, you must also submit a W-3C. So you have to make a corrected W-3 because that W-3 is directly related to the W-2. So if you correct one, you must correct the other. I always like it when they make those things pretty obvious, like putting a C behind it means it's corrected. So that's pretty easy to remember. W-4, we're all pretty familiar with as well. That's the withholding certificate for the employee that they give you when they first get hired on with your company. They could give it to you again throughout the year if they need to change their withholdings for any reason. So that's a good one to know. If you put a P behind it, that is a W-4 for pension or annuity payment. So that one to me is pretty easy to remember as well. W-4P is for pension. Similarly, a W-4S is for sick. So if you're having taxes withheld from third-party sick pay, that comes in the form of a W-4S. I like it when they put those letters that make sense. Makes it much easier to remember. A couple others that are important that I remember getting questions about is the SS4. And the SS4 is the application for an EIN. So if you are a new company and you need to apply for a federal employer identification number, the SS4 is the document that you do that with. SS5 is an application for a social security card. So sometimes you'll have an employee that lost their social security card or they need a social security card because they are moving here from another country or whatever the case is. The SS5 is going to be that document. More of the ones that I know were popular or are more of the popular documents that you may need to be aware of are a W-9. A W-9 is the request for taxpayer identification number and certification. That's the document that you get from any of your 1099 subcontracted people. So if you're paying somebody as a 1099 because you're contracting them to do work for you, the W-9 is the document that you need from them. 941, we already talked about. A 941X is going to be a corrected 941. So if something needs to be changed or corrected on the 941, you're going to submit a 941X. A 943 is for agricultural employers. That seems to be a popular question as well. So if you're an agricultural employer, instead of filing a Form 941, you're going to file a 943. Similarly, if you need to do a correction, you could file a 943X. A 944 is an annual federal return. So if you're an annual filer, you would file as an employer. If you were an annual filer, you would file a 944 as opposed to a 941. That's definitely not as popular of a form, but it is for some really small employers. They do file forms 944. 1040S is also one that they seem to ask about, and it's the annual withholding tax return for U.S. source income of foreign persons. So really quickly, pop quiz on federal tax deposits. An employer qualifies to deposit employment taxes quarterly during the first quarter of the year. Under what deposit schedule will it deposit taxes for the remainder of the year? So my test tip for you guys is the look back period is July 1st through June 30th of the preceding calendar year. And yes, Miss Mannon and Dalby ladies, you guys are 100% correct. It's always based on the look back period. So COVID is a good example of this. You may have been a very large employer, and when COVID happened, you had to go to a skeleton crew. And so for a quarter, you could have had very small tax deposits, but that doesn't allow you to change your frequency. It's that entire look back period that determines when you need to deposit for the whole remaining calendar year. So keep that in mind. This is one of those tricky questions that they try and get you with because you think, oh, I can, I'm gonna do math and answer the question, but really it's, you just need to keep in mind that that look back period is what they're focused on. For whatever reason, this question came up on my exam and Rebecca's exam. They just simply asked what agency the multiple worksite reporting is filed with. So it's one thing that we wanted to bring up to you guys is that that is filed with the Bureau of Labor Statistics, or the BLS. So if you get that question, it's, you have the easy answer now. W-2s can be intimidating to try and complete. So one quick tip that I have for you guys is, at least for the first set of boxes, the most common boxes are those first ones on the W-2s. If you keep in mind that odd boxes are wages and even boxes are taxes, and they kind of correspond, then that helps you to remember what goes where. So box 1 is wages, tips, and other compensation. And box 2 is the federal income tax that goes with those wages. Box 3, again, is Social Security wages. Box 4 is then Social Security tax. Box 5 is Medicare wages, and box 6 is Medicare tax. So those odd boxes are wages and those even boxes are taxes. So just a little hint to keep in mind when you're thinking about W-2s.
So what was it? It just kind of, I heard something about hit pound and then nothing.
Box 10 seems to be a popular question. Box 10 is dependent care benefits. So if you had any FSA dependent care, that would go in box 10. And then the other thing that is a common question that they can ask is codes in box 12. Now, there's a lot of codes in box 12, and I'm not going to tell you you have to remember each and every one of them, but I will tell you you're going to want some of the more popular ones. So your deferred compensation codes are going to be more popular. Your third party sick is a more popular one. Uncollected Social Security tax for group term life, things like that. And then, what was the other one I was thinking of? Oh, Code DD. Code DD reporting is also a popular one. So that, and sorry, that is cost of health insurance for employers, and it's not required to report if you had less than 250 W-2s submitted in the prior calendar year. But if you had over 250, then it is required that you report that. It's just informational for the IRS. There's no tax consequences for it, but it is required to be reported. So, and that's code DD. So that's a good one. So W-2s and W-3s are filed with the SSA online. Forms 1099 are filed through the FIRE system. And ACA forms 1095B and 1095C, or 1094B and 1094C, are filed through the AIR system. So the way that I remember that is ACA goes with AIR, A. 1099s are through the FIRE system. And I can just remember that because I file them every year. And then of course, W-2s are filed through the SSA, the Social Security Administration, through the Business Services Online System, the BSO. So I do know someone who took the exam in the spring, and she was asked about how ACA forms 1094 and 1095 B and C are filed, and that, again, those are ACA forms, so they're filed through the AIR system. So really quick pop quiz. Which form is used by a local government employer when withholding only Medicare tax? 941, 943, 944, or 945. Dolby, I agree with you 100%. A, form 941. Yep. So 941 is the quarterly return for employment taxes. 943 is agricultural. 944 is going to be annual if you have less than $1,000 in tax liability. And then 945 is an annual for federal income tax for non-wages, non-employment taxes. It is 12:58. I think I'm going to stop there for the day if you guys are good with that. Questions? Did anybody think of anything specific that they want me to go over tomorrow or Friday that I can research more or try and provide more information on?
Maybe just a gross up calculation.
Let's do it.
It might be in here. I can't even remember.
I'll check through, and if it's not, I'll go ahead. All right, let's call it a day. I will throw a gross up calculation in there if there's not one already. If you ladies think of anything extra that you want me to add in there, you all have my email, so just shoot me an email and I'll try to throw it in there. Okay.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Melissa.
Thanks, ladies. Talk to you tomorrow.